Good morning, everyone. And in this presentation, I want to just go over some best practices and some strategies for doing site photography. Okay, so in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about planning before you go to your site, thinking about what you might want to be looking for when you go there. I'll give you some tips on technique, and then we'll talk about the different types of shots you might take. There's overall shots, detail shots, images that reflect surfaces and flows, images that reflect sensory data, and then images that reflect atmospheric or seasonal weather or other events. So before you go to your site, make sure that you bring the following things with you. You'll want a sketch pad or paper and pens. It's also great to bring along a printed plan, which can just be a printout from Google Earth, and put some sketch paper over top of that. Tape it down before you go. You'll want to use your sketch pad as a hard surface so that you can draw on something there. So it can even be just a small printout that fits in your sketch pad, but this is really handy for pinpointing notes as you walk through the site and also pinpointing locations on the plan from where you have taken photos. Of course, you'll need a camera and a smartphone, a point and shoot or a digital camera. They all work just as well. Finally, I would suggest processing your photos with Lightroom after you have taken them. So you don't have to do any crazy editing, but Lightroom has a bunch of tools that you can use that are automatic, such as lens distortions and straightening tools and brightening and that kind of thing. So the photos I'm going to use as a reference were taken at the Agacon Gardens in Devon, Alberta, and these were published in Architectural Record in 2019. And this is, I think, a good example of a large site. Now, you're probably not going to be focusing on a designed landscape space like this, but it took me about an hour and a half to 2 hours to walk around the site and take these photos. So let's get started. Before you go to a site, it's important to consider the viewpoints you would like to capture. So you might wonder, like, how am I going to do this before I've even been to the site? How will I know what I want to capture? But there's a lot that you can think about just by looking at a Google Earth photo. So within that photo, you can see main spaces, important intersections, and intersections don't just have to be traffic intersections. They can also be the intersections between different types of buildings. For example, residential to commercial or commercial to industrial. You can note transitions between materials and topographical features. You can detect open spaces, and you can also see where there's going to be typical conditions that you might want to pay attention to. So think about how you might be able to get different views on your site. Are there any places on the site that have raised areas where you could get an overview shot from up high? Or are there places where the topography means you're going to be quite far down looking up at something? Those are all things to think about before you go so that you can sort of chart a path through the site that makes sense for taking photos. And then finally, consider how you might use the photos to tell a story about the site. Again, you might think this is not possible to do before you've actually visited the site, but you can decide in advance what things you'd like to look out for. You can look for water flows. You can look for wind and environmental flows, such as the flows of planting over a landscape. You can look for the flows of people, especially along main urban streets. You can look for the flows of circulation like bikes, cars, and other modes of transportation. And then you can always look for places within your Google Earth photo where there's big differences in typologies. So where small buildings turn into big buildings, where cultural districts meet other districts, etc. So technique for taking photos is that the time of the day and the method of capture are things that you can plan for, and they really make a difference in how you're able to use these photos later. So I recommend that you use your camera grid and built-in level. most smartphones and cameras come with what's called a rule of thirds grid and a built-in level. You can usually just activate these within your camera app itself, or you might have to go into the menu settings of your digital camera. The purpose of these compositional grids is to help you place horizon lines and important elements along these rule of thirds grids. So the eye is trained to want to divide images into planes, and we can help compose images so that our eye can more easily read these planes. You'll see in the first photo that you can see there's a relationship between the big pillars, the ground treatment, and the constructed fence in the background. Then there's also a line of planting that's beyond that. This photo is in one point perspective, which means everything is vanishing towards a central point on the horizon. Looking at this photo, it's very easy to see the relationship in size and material between these different built and green elements. Another tip is to take photos from chest height. Don't tilt the camera up or down, holding it over your head or below you. Try to aim for a spot around 5 feet off the ground. This is usually a height that enables you to shoot straight on and get a horizon line that makes sense and that is easy to keep horizontal. Check the time of day that you're going to be going to the site. The best hours for photography are first thing in the morning from between 7 to 10 a.m. or later in the afternoon and evening between 4 and 7 p.m. Midday has really harsh light and high contrast, and I would recommend that you avoid going to your site. You'll notice that photos that you take during midday have really high differences between the bright areas and the dark shadows, and this can make different features difficult to read. Okay, some different types of shots you can take. The first type are overall shots. Overall shots give a wide, almost panoramic view of a space. They're almost always shot horizontally straight on and focus on main spaces and structures. So a few things that you should focus on when you're taking overall shots. Where are the points of entry and access? Consider how people get to the site, how they flow through it, the pathways that they take to circulate, and also points of informal or alternative access. You can also think about processions. Are there places where there are formal processions? And also circuits through the space. Are there places that are more scenic to walk around? Or are there hidden spaces that can be discovered? Second are main axis and circulation spaces. So in this project, the main axis is very clear. It begins from the upper pavilion with all the pillars, and it flows down with this central water feature all the way to a lake, which is in the background. In an urban space, the main axis might not be so apparent, or there might be many central axes. There might be a lot of different places that are important to document, but I do think that in every city and urban space, there are hierarchies of streets and ways to get around spaces. So try to make sure you identify and capture those. Important features of these spaces are constructed or natural symmetry, the integration of hardscape and softscape, and the general views of how they're used. So really think before you go to your site, is there a central spine or area that people tend to congregate on? Finally, consider spatial centers. Spatial centers are places that draw people together. They could be specific cultural institutions, designed open spaces, natural open spaces, plazas, or other centers within the space. These are like moments where gatherings could happen and have potential for events and other connection. Of course, a lot of open spaces now you can't gather, but you can see the traces of where these spaces exist and understand that they were designed to bring people together. Detail shots. So detail shots help us understand the haptic scale of a site. The haptic scale means things that we can see up close and touch and understand on a material level. So when I take detail shots, I try to think in plan, section, and elevation. Some things you might want to focus on for details are seating and site furnishings. So what is the character of the site furnishings? When you look around your space, do you see repeated elements like certain types of benches, certain types of garbage cans or lighting fixtures? Are there a pattern of signs that go along the street? What is the shape and materiality of these site furnishings? How far apart are they spaced? And test them out. Are they comfortable? Do they feel clean? Are they things you want to use? These are all little notes that you can make as you walk around your site. The next thing to consider are material transitions. And in this photo, I am showing 3 different materials coming together. One is a bench, which is the little triangular bit that's poking out from the bottom. And then there's 2 types of paving, a grill, which goes over the naturalized areas, and a stone paving that's connected to the grill. But it could just as easily be material transition between a lawn and a sidewalk, or a curb and a paving pattern on the street. Try to consider all of these important junctures where materials are coming together. What is the transition between them? How do they butt up against each other? Does it look like someone has considered this transition, or does it look like it's just happening haphazardly? Is there a direction to the transition, and are these materials suited to the space? Finally, we can look for patterns. Looking for patterns on a site are helpful because they kind of give us clues about what the site is used for and the importance or cultural meaning of a site. So if there are patterns on the site, what are they made of? Do they have any special meanings or symbology? And what might they mean, and who has put them there? There are things like natural patterns, there are man-made patterns. Keep your eye out for these. We can also take shots that demonstrate surfaces and flows. Looking at surfaces, whether hardscape or softscape, and the flows over the ground surfaces can help us detect unseen traces of elements such as wind, water, and the presence of nature. So even on hardscape surfaces like pavings, you can detect patterns of movement. You can also detect patterns of wetness and dryness and drainage. So in the first image, we have a hardscape pattern, which is quite complex and detailed. But within this pattern, there are 3 drains, and you can see that there's some wet areas on the stones around these drains. We can kind of make a guess about how water is flowing through this hardscape surface. That could be something you do a little sketch of when you're walking around the site. So think about, what is the primary surface of the ground? What materials are used, and what color are they? What are they made out of? Are there patterns? And can you see traces of use? We also have planting and natural infrastructure. So ask yourself how plants are used on this site. Are they naturally occurring, or are they purposely planted? What functions do the plants serve? If there's trees, were they planted to be shade, or are they naturally occurring? Do they impact the microclimate? For example, is it cooler to stand under a tree than it is to stand on the sidewalk in the sun? And do the plants help absorb heat and water? Sometimes in certain cities, plants will be used as natural infrastructure to direct stormwater flows and other types of pollutants that enter our streets from our vehicles. So make a note of spaces where you see plants thriving in difficult spaces, or otherwise plants that are not doing very well because of perhaps other environmental conditions. Finally, we can think about flowing elements. And the best thing to think about here is, of course, water, but there are many other flows that we could consider. When you see piles of leaves or garbage, or even dirt running along the side of a gutter, you can think about how unseen flows such as wind and water are acting on the site. And this is all evidence of how a site is used. So we have to consider that a site is used by non-human entities, and these non-human entities can be nature or animals. So look for traces of those types of flows on the site. We can record different sensory data with photos. Of course, it's always nice to have other types of data to really engage our senses, such as the sound of flowing water or the smell recorded in words of how a site smells. So look for elements in your site that impact your senses of smell, hearing, and touch. Record them with video or sound and make a record of their qualities on your site plan as you're walking through. In this particular project, water was a very important feature, and it was used throughout the project in different ways to showcase the quality of water. So we have water as an audible guide. Throughout the site, you could hear the sounds of water flowing and changing in different directions. So this kind of guided you through the space and gave you an idea of what was to come. Water was also used as a point of reflection in different places. This is an example of a large stone water table, but there was other examples on the site of where water was used as mist or as a wetland surface. Water was also used as a cleansing element. So there was a lot of places where you were invited to touch the water with your hands in a way to sort of ritually clean yourself as you move through the space. Finally, let's think about the different events and atmospheres that are possible to have on our site. So we're going at one point at one time during one day, but I'm going to encourage you to visit your site multiple times throughout the semester so that you can really get a sense of what the site is like throughout the seasons with different uses and with different weather patterns happening. So think about what types of events are usually held in this space and what would they normally look like. I say normally because, of course, many events are not happening anywhere in any public spaces right now. But can you look back in other people's photos and see other times where their space was used for something that it wasn't intended for, or where the space was changed or altered to accommodate more people or a specific event? Think about how sites can change as the seasons change. So what does this site look like in the off season? Are people still using it, or is it abandoned? How do the uses of the site change as we move through the seasons? And also, how does the site look at night? Is there artificial lighting that helps people use this site through different times of the day and night? Or is this a site that's really only meant to be used during the day? What is the different quality of the surfaces when it comes to the lighting? Are they reflective? Do they enhance the atmosphere of the place at night because of the way that the lighting is designed? Or is the lighting not even considered? So the final thing I like to think about when I go to any site is if you had to use just one photo to describe the site, what would it be? I like to try to think about this. If there was just one image that had to go on the cover of the magazine or the front of the portfolio, what would that image be? What is going to capture all of the qualities of the space effectively so you can tell somebody, yes, this is my site? I hope these tips have been helpful to you and help you think about how you might use your time wisely as you go to your site so you're feeling more focused and directed in what you're looking at. If you have any questions, just let me know. I'm happy to answer them.